Okay, well, I am showing right up 12 noon. So we're going to get started and talk a little bit about SharePoint Madness. I've got Stephanie Donahue on the phone with me. Hey, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone.
So I realized as I was putting this together and I got really excited about March Madness that we were coming in right at the end of all that, but I think it's still fun. I think people are still talking about all the excitement of March Madness, and I was in a basketball mood. So that's what we're rolling with. So, Stephanie, you ever find yourself in the midst of SharePoint madness?
Oh, you could say I live there, Joy.
Well, the things I wanted to talk about today, as I was doing some research and looking around to find out what people are talking about, what they're looking for answers for, when we go to Google, what are we Googling to figure out how to do in SharePoint? And the final four of the most commonly searched, researched, and questions asked topics that I decided to pick on were content types, folders, especially can't drag and drop folders. I was just curious one day and I went to Google and I typed in SharePoint, why can't I? And it auto-filled in, why can't I drag and drop folders? So I thought, hey, that's a good idea. Let's talk about that a little bit. Latest and greatest features for SharePoint Online. Some of the things we talk about will apply in that topic just to the online folks. Some of you who have on-premises installations of SharePoint may be pondering what the future holds for you. Are you going to eventually go to SharePoint Online one day? So it's still definitely worth tuning in on that. And then the last one is performance. Now, I was going to have Sean McDonough sit in and talk with us about performance because that's where he spends a lot of his life. But he's claiming that there was some storm system or something that kept him from catching a flight from Austin back home yesterday. I think he just wanted to stay where he was and he didn't want to work today, but we're going to roll with it. So when his blog comes out that he's working on that really digs deep into performance, we're going to have that available to you guys. So stay tuned to it. We'll have a lot more in-depth information, but we're still going to talk about some hints, some tips, some tricks, and some whatnot to do's there. Okay, so in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to SharePoint, almost any feature, functionality, or topic of SharePoint falls into one of three categories. It's either awesome stuff, confusing stuff, or annoying stuff. And quite frankly, most things in SharePoint fall into all three, and they live somewhere in the middle of this little Venn diagram. Content types are awesome, but they're kind of confusing. I don't know about all of you guys. Stephanie, ask you a question. When you first started in SharePoint, did content type make sense to you?
I think it took a while to wrap my mind around it, right? Because there's so much to it. It's like one concept can actually impact your entire environment. So, well, I think I understood the basics. I think I didn't really understand the depth of how it could impact my long-term plan.
I agree. I agree. I will say, I'll tell
Oh,
him
hey,
myself.
Joy, we have a question. It looks like your presentation is not showing. Can
Uh-oh.
you try to reshare it?
Absolutely.
There we go. Now we have it.
Awesome. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Um, but yeah, with content types, I'll tell him myself, maybe I'm just slow. That could be. But I would say it probably took me a solid 2 years of my first time walking into SharePoint to where that light bulb went off and I said, oh, this is what content type means. And we're going to talk about that, but I'll give you the quick definition that I came up with. It's your bundle of columns that define what you're working with in SharePoint. And if it's a document or a file, you may have a template that goes with that. But it's just a bunch of columns that you bundle up together, slap a name on them, and you can reuse them. Once I understood that, it made sense, and I understood, and I realized the power and the awesome stuff that you can do with them. But they were very confusing for me for a while. Performance is awesome when it's done right. Or if there's not a lot going on. SharePoint can be very responsive, very fast, but it can be very confusing to figure out how to get it there, how to tweak it, how to get things going such that it becomes awesome. But until that point, it stays in the annoying category. It can be very difficult. Well, it's just a web page. Why is it taking so long to load? Folders. If you tuned in to the things we love to hate about SharePoint in February, you'll remember that I told you a secret about folders. That folder is the F word in SharePoint, literally and metaphorically. We want to try to avoid their use as much as possible, but there are times when you're working in a library and you just need to grab this group of files, bundle them up, and stick them somewhere. And you can't drag and drop folders. Or can you? Let's look at that here in a minute. Latest and greatest updates in SharePoint. I think it's awesome until one of those hits me and impacts a presentation, or something totally changes, or a button used to be somewhere and now it's not, or I used to have this functionality and now it's different. That definitely epitomizes being awesome, annoying, and confusing all at once. And we'll look into that here in just a second too. So buckle up. Stephanie, what's your favorite latest and greatest feature for SharePoint Online so far?
Ooh, I've been playing a lot with Flow and with Power Apps. So that's where my interest is right now, and I love to see the direction of that stuff. So, you know, what's funny about content types is that they really haven't changed a whole lot over the past years. And so I guess at least in that perspective, you know, it's kind of nice that what we were doing before still kind of works going forward, only there's a lot more that we can do with it now that we have these other workflow tools. And so content types at their core, being set up correctly, can do a whole lot of really cool things going forward with dashboards and workflows and all kinds of things. So that's what I'm excited about is Flow and Power Apps and the new possibilities there.
And you hit on something that's very SharePointy. Once you get those basic building blocks of SharePoint down, by and large they won't change. The wrapper may, or the button you click may look a little different or get moved around, but content types are building block in SharePoint. And like you said, they've not changed. So once we get our arms wrapped around that and we've got it figured out and we have our plan, I mean, it just gets better and better. We just get more stuff we can do with it. Our knowledge grows, our understanding grows, the features increase, and it gets exciting. And then we all geek out and we go to SharePoint Saturdays and have fun. I mean, you can't beat that. What kind of life is that? All right. So content types, we're talking about that a lot. Content types are so incredibly important in SharePoint. They give you consistency for your metadata. And if you've been with SharePoint more than a month or so, then the word metadata is just part of your everyday vocabulary. It's our data about data. Content types give us a way to create these portable, reusable column bundles. And if it's a document, again, we have a document template that we wrap up with that, and we can use it anywhere. SharePoint Online is constantly being updated. You're always getting the latest and greatest updates from Microsoft as soon as they think that those features and that functionality is ready for prime time. You don't have to wait for service packs. You don't have to wait for your company to be ready to write that check to go to the next version of SharePoint with server upgrades and all that. It just comes online. Performance, it can be responsive. You can tweak the settings so you load your content on your pages quickly and efficiently. But on the confusing side, what the heck is a content type? Document template, what are you talking about? Where is that? What do I do with it? And so columns, I thought we just go to a document library and there are columns there. Or if I need one, I just go create it. Why do I need to bundle it all together? Can't drag and drop those folders. I can create them. Why can't I move them? If I can move a file, why can't I move a folder? I've worked on file shares for 100 years. I can do anything I want with a folder. Why can't I do that in SharePoint? Why is SharePoint slow? It's just a website. It's just a web page. I've just got a web part on this page. It's just a couple of pictures. Why is this not happening quickly? And then it's confusing when things update quickly if we're online because our familiar views change, literally sometimes overnight. And things look different sometimes when you log in the next day. And then things that are annoying, SharePoint. We do love to pick on SharePoint a little bit. I think we kind of commiserate together on some of the annoying stuff inside of SharePoint. My number one thing is when I go into a library, I've got my title, created, modified columns. That doesn't tell me a whole lot about my information. It doesn't tell me who is this for, what's it about at the core, when's the last time that if this was a contract it was renewed, or is it going to expire. I don't get a lot of information about it with just those generic columns there. And have you ever gone in your Word library or your document library and you click that new button, get the little drop down, and it's just a blank Word document? How many people start their work every day with a blank Word document? It happens, but it doesn't happen a lot. I'm going to get really annoyed when I have a folder full of 100 documents and maybe a few subfolders in there, and someone comes and tells me I have to rebuild that entire file structure. That's annoying. Performance is annoying when it's slow, and it only takes about 3 to 5 seconds for our average end users to wait for a page to load before they pick up the phone, call the help desk, and say there's something wrong with SharePoint. That annoys the help desk. And then they just forward it to us, regardless of what the problem is. We know if someone that's not trained in SharePoint on the help desk answers the phone, they hear the word SharePoint, that ticket just goes straight to whoever the SharePoint people are. That can be annoying too. And then if you're online, it can be annoying when SharePoint's always being updated. There's always a change. Nothing stays the same. That can get a little overwhelming. So I'm going to break down content types. This is the cool stuff. We bundle those columns together and we have a document template if we're working with files and documents. We can use that anywhere we want to. Stephanie, do you have a favorite content type? When you talk with people about it, do you have a favorite example?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I can pick a favorite.
Mine's the expense report. Because I like money, right? Who doesn't like to get their money back? If I'm traveling and I'm out spending money and it's time for me to get that back, it's nice that I can just go to a library where expense reports are held, click on that new document button, and have my expense report template open, just like I've got here in our screenshot. Inside that library, I have my columns that can show maybe if it was international travel or who the approving manager was, what the expense was for, what the total was, all that fun stuff. But it's all right there. I don't have to recreate that. I can have a central one for everyone in my team to go to, or each team can have their own individual libraries, but it's the same content type, bundled together and reusable. You can use a content type hub, and I'm going to be writing a blog on this. We're going to have a content type blog come out in the not too distant future, and I'll walk you through the steps of how to do each of these things. But that content type hub, you just build it once and then you push it out to whatever site collection needs to use it, and whichever sub-site in those site collections need to use them. So you're not constantly building the same things over and over. You're not putting the same column in 20 different libraries. Just build it once. If people need to tweak it, they can, but one and done by and large. And if you ever need to go back to update it, you go to your hub and you just push that back out to everybody. And always remember that the name of your content type is typically going to reflect the type of content that those columns are defining. If I've got a contact list of my internal PAIT Group folks, I don't need to know what company they work for because we all work for PAIT Group. But if they're external, it might be nice to know if they work for company ABCD or Acme Inc. or any of those fun things. I need to get different information. Content types let you do that. And you can have multiple content types in the same library, and you get a different form different column views to fill out depending on which one you choose.
I have an example real quick there, if I could jump in. So something that we see a lot of our customers do that content types really help with is being able to define a specific document like a policy or procedure. So if you label that as policy and procedure document and you have very specific metadata associated with it, for example, the language the document's in, the department that it belongs to, maybe the type of policy it is, or if it's a form, etc. So what you can do with that then is you can allow under subsites, you can have your documents added per department. So those subsites each have differing levels of security for updating those documents. You don't want your IT folks updating HR documents and vice versa, right? So you've got them separated by security, but then what you can do is use a search-based web part to surface a policy and procedure content type on a home page, and then all of the users can actually access those documents from one place at the root site. So they don't have access to modify those documents, but they can see them. So they can see HR documents and IT documents, engineering documents. They can see all of those policies and procedures in one place using that search roll-up. And you can pull them specifically because they're labeled a policy or procedure content type. So once you really get into the details, what you're creating is the ability to have a search homepage that might work like Amazon. You go and you search for something, let's say shoes. You're going to search for, okay, I know I want a pair of shoes, but then you're going to refine and you're going to say, I want size 9 Nikes and I want them to be red, right? So then you could do the same thing with your policies and procedures. That metadata is what drives that refinement on that search page. So you really have a lot of potential here. You can come away from using folders and subsites and people having to dig through folder and a folder and a folder, make it very easy for the end user to access documents while still securing them in the way that you want to. So just a quick example there.
That's fantastic. And I love the shoes reference.
Yes. That's what you get when you get two girls on a webinar. Yeah, shoes.
Yeah. Shoes are going to come up. We're good with that. We'll have basketball again in a minute. So, and I love that. In search, we'll talk about search when it comes to performance. Having search web parts can kind of, or using search more instead of our more old-fashioned web parts makes performance faster too. But there's my expense report. So we just think about, like she said, you define, is it a policy? Is it a procedure? Is it an expense report? We think about the information that defines that. If I come to that library with that type of content in it, what do I need to see before I even open a document to know I'm opening the right one? It's a contract. Do I need to see my contracts by expiration date so I know what's coming up, what needs to be renewed first, and I can filter out the other stuff? Or am I looking for something for a particular client so I can filter in my library by that, but I know I'm getting all of that metadata captured by using that contract content type throughout my environment. So it can be confusing, absolutely. All we got to do is huddle, talk about it, and yes, actually sit down and communicate with our users. For some of us that can be a little harder than others. Stephen admitted last month he can be a little intimidated by end users sometimes, so he prefers to work with the machines involved. But ask them questions. What do you work with every day? I used to work for a subcontractor in the defense industry, and I was helping them with their proposal environment. And they were all frustrated, so frustrated, because they had hundreds and hundreds of documents in one library, and they were still only using those 3 default document library columns. The name of the document, when it was created, and who created it. Not the name of the client or the name of the program, the name of the prime contractor. None of that content was being surfaced, so it was confusing. What I usually do when I'm huddling with a client or with fellow SharePointers, have a meeting set up and have a couple of representatives of like one team at a time come in and I'm going to go old school here. I'm going to actually recommend you have them print out, if possible, and bring copies of a couple of the most commonly used files. What do they work with every day? Have them bring a few. Talk about them. What's it called? Because that's probably the name of your content type. What do you need to know about it without opening the file? You just come in and you look at your library root page. What's important to know? Flip that piece of paper over and actually put pen to paper. There's something magical that can happen when we start to put pen to paper and write. It kind of kicks the brain going. And just jot those ideas down. And there's a good chance that those are going to become your columns in your content type. So you can start with the default. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just jump in real quick. For those that don't want to work on paper, if you do prefer to do some of that planning instead of doing a whiteboard, or if maybe you have a remote person you're trying to plan with, I'm a huge fan of Xmind. It is a kind of a mind mapping tool. It's really great for planning metadata and content types, and it's free. That's the best part. There's a basic version. I use it all the time. So Xmind is the tool. It's great.
She's actually introduced me to that, and I'm starting to use it more and more. But I haven't let go of my pen and paper yet. I have an old-fashioned heart. Okay. So you get denied when you try to drag and drop folders. It can be really annoying. It can be frustrating, and it can kind of make you mad. So maybe you're trying to move your folder from your desktop into SharePoint, and you may see one of these two. It's not really an error, it's more a message just saying we can't upload folders or empty files. And actually that was a new one, the empty files thing. I tried to bring in just a blank Word document for a test, and SharePoint said nope, you actually have to have a Word in your fake files. That was new to me. And then you may see, sorry, that didn't work. Folders and invalid files can't be dragged to upload. Very annoying. Well, some of us may say, well, let's not use folders anyway, but sometimes that's the fastest way to get content in. So here's the annoying part about that, and here's the frustrating part. You can drag and drop a folder from your desktop into a library if, of course, if you're using the Edge browser and you're using, and this is my SharePoint Online, folks. If you're on premises, I'm sorry, that's not there yet. If you're using the new view for document libraries that Microsoft introduced recently, you can drag and drop a folder into SharePoint. If you're in the classic view, which I have to admit, Stephanie, are you guilty of reverting back to the classic view in Online?
It depends on what I'm trying to do. I have to admit, I did do a drag and drop yesterday with a folder into the modern view, so I mix it up a bit.
I agree. There's certain things I still haven't found the right set of button clicks to do in the new modern view that I know I can do in the classic view. So yes, even we kind of are guilty of reverting back and having trouble with change. But if you're SharePoint Online and you need to bring a folder in, you can do that in Edge and the new view for the library. If you're in Internet Explorer, it doesn't matter what view you're using, it will not pull over. But once you get that folder into your library, you can use not Internet Explorer, you can use Explorer View to then manipulate that folder more like you were on a file share. But just remember, Explorer View will not work in Chrome. Chrome doesn't understand what that is. That's got to be Internet Explorer on that. So there are a couple little workarounds, and it does take work to get to the workaround. But don't give up. And just keep trying. But again, Edge and the new modern view for SharePoint Online is going to be your way to get in there. Otherwise, you want to utilize Explorer View. I will throw this out there. Try to avoid, and by that I mean please don't ever, if you can help it, map a network drive to a SharePoint library. You can use that as a last-ditch effort if you're in Chrome, but I would recommend not ever doing that unless an emergency for SharePoint, because things just sometimes go poof when that happens. Your map network drive doesn't necessarily understand that there's a recycle bin, If something gets deleted in that view, it will not necessarily go to your recycle bin in SharePoint. So just a word of warning there. Be very cautious with map network drives. Okay, performance. And this was going to be super deep and technical because Sean was going to be here. But apparently Sean and airplanes don't get along. And I think it was Sean and Rackley, so we know that was a recipe for disaster. We never should let
That's
them go
trouble.
together.
That's what that
No,
is. It's trouble.
that was not good planning on our part. But you just say Rackley and people shake their heads. Oh, Rackley. SharePoint can be fine-tuned to have really great performance, but it takes work and it takes planning. If you're on premises, you have if you're a control freak, you have what feels like a really good advantage there because more than likely you've got access to the people that are in charge of your local network if that's not you. You're going to have a little less latency because those servers are going to be on maybe your dedicated network or at least maybe even in your building. So there's some things there you can look at that you don't get if you're on the online environment. But regardless of on-premises or online and in the cloud, what we do with our pages, what we do with our actual content is going to have a great impact on the responsiveness of our sites and our content. Now, for my online folks, you're not in Kansas anymore. And I hope I don't offend anyone when I say this, but I used to live in Kansas, and I'm glad I'm not in Kansas anymore. Was not my favorite place to live. Pretty flat. But we don't have our farm. It's not, SharePoint Online is not taking the farm and just picking it up and putting it in a Microsoft data center. They have massive data centers, but in all of those server configurations, they have things that they call stamps. And those stamps are where you live as a SharePoint Online organization. No local network there, no way we can get to those load balancers and those web front ends and tinker with those. And I heard Sean give his presentation on performance, and it was really funny the reaction that he got when he said, you know, doing your load testing doesn't do you any good if you're SharePoint Online. Because if Microsoft sees that you've got a lot of activity happening and there's a lot of load being put on your environment, they're going to go throw more servers at it. You're going to get more resources. They're going to kind of build up underneath you and lift you up to help carry that load. And when that drops away and things are slower and calmer in the middle of the night when no one's working, they take those servers away again. So you'll never get a really good idea what's going on with your load testing.
There's also a trick there too, especially you'll notice this when you're migrating into the environment because you're putting a lot of load on your particular tenant. They'll support that performance to a point, but if they feel like you are really kind of pounding the servers, trying to get your data migrated into SharePoint Online, they are going to throttle your performance or your connection into the tenant. So you do kind of have to watch. If you try to do load testing, it's going to start faster and then it's going to slow down over time. And that's something that Microsoft does because you are sharing that tenant with others, or that environment with others, and so they are protecting the other folks that are on that same environment with you, and so they're going to slow you down. The way around that is through your there's like in ShareGate, for example, they have insane mode, and that's using Azure to route your data into SharePoint Online, and that they'll allow, and the performance is much better. So something just to keep in mind there. If you notice a performance decrease and you are putting a lot of data into your tenant, that's probably why they're probably throttling you.
Good to know. Very good to know. Another thing to keep in mind is that our load times can be a little deceptive, at least our observed load times. People will say, well, my page isn't loading. And if you dig into the nuts and bolts of it, your page is loading pretty quick, but there's content on there that just hasn't caught up yet. And it may be that slowdown is what we're asking our pages to render for us. Do we have really big high definition photos on those pages? Do we have a web part that's calling data that lives somewhere else and making calculations and doing refinements and really cranking to get stuff for us when we load the page. If so, it's not the page itself that's not loading, it's that data and those calculations that we're asking to come. Do we have a lot of scripts running on these pages at load time? Is it calling CSS? I already mentioned the large images. And what about web parts? What's in them and how many do we have? That's always a good thought too. And I learned this, Sean taught me this, structural navigation, just the system generated standard structural navigation, is a little slower for our online environments. If you are SharePoint Online, you may look into using metadata navigation. That will be a little more responsive, a little faster, and SharePoint won't be building out that structural nav for you as the page is trying to load. Speaking of web parts are awesome because those are our windows into our content inside of SharePoint. They're also our windows into content that's in other places, not SharePoint. But if you've had a web part on your page and then its usefulness has gone, we're done with it. We don't need it anymore. Delete it. Now, if you've ever accidentally deleted a web part, you know it does not go to your recycle bin. That can be painful. If you need it again, close it, and it just removes it from the view, but be careful doing that. We don't want to do that for every web part because those closed web parts on the page, they're still being generated in the background. I did once have some folks that was having a hard time with their page, went and looked, and I put it into the web part maintenance view. And just the quick and easy way to get there is you go to your .aspx page, and at the end of that X, do a question mark, contents equals 1, and hit enter. And they had like, it was less than 100, but it was more than 60 something web parts that were just closed living on that page. And this was in 2007. Stephanie, do you still remember 2007 SharePoint?
I try not to. I try to block those years.
I mean, you could do stuff, but it was hard. But yeah, I still have a little soft spot. I did cut my teeth on an '07 farm, but yeah, it was rough. But we just went through and we deleted all those web parts. We just went down that whole long page. Do you still need this? No, delete it. Do you still need this? No, delete it. Took about an hour, deleted it, and it was amazing how much faster that page loaded after that. Fantastic. So just keep that in mind. And I'm kind of proud of my meme there. I made that just for this presentation. I thought it fit. Okay, latest and greatest updates SharePoint Online. It's so great, and it's so annoying because as soon as you're used to it, you end up with new stuff. And people usually fall into one of two categories for latest and greatest updates to SharePoint. It's either the best thing ever and it's Christmas morning every time something new happens, or we build up our resolve and we march grimly forward to see what the heck has Microsoft done now and what's this going to do to us. It can be a little bit in between for me. I was getting ready to do some teaching when SharePoint introduced its new modern view to the lists and libraries. So I had to go create additional slides pretty quick for how to do certain steps in libraries this way, or this way, or this way, or this way. So that was a little work. And Rackley has a buddy that was going to go do a presentation at a conference, and all of a sudden his slides were out of date because of a change that SharePoint received overnight. But just work on your assist when things change. You don't have to schedule your updates or patches anymore if you're online. Microsoft handles that for you. So you can redirect that newfound time to start learning and testing and anticipating how these new changes are going to affect you and your user base. And then we have that communicate again. We go back to a huddle. Let them know, okay, this change happened. This is how you work with it. This is where you go to do your day-to-day activities. If you don't have a SharePoint community in your office, in your SharePoint Online, I would highly suggest you consider starting one. Communication is key. It's really good to sit down and help people because not everyone's a button clicker. Not everyone feels comfortable jumping in and exploring what great new wonderful things have happened. Go look at the waffle, the little app launcher in the upper left-hand corner. A lot of people have never explored those apps that are there or even know they're there. Now's the time to start embracing this change, learning, and sharing it with your SharePoint people. It's a great excuse to start a little SharePoint community, even if it's your site collection administrators and super users. Once a quarter, have a conversation. If you know something's coming up, talk with them, let them know. Conquer these changes together. And buckle up. Stay flexible. Things are going to change whether you're online or on premises, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Change is good. It just can be annoying. Don't be afraid to jump in. You can start small, whether it's starting with 1 or 2 content types just in your own team. IT is typically a guinea pig for SharePoint because we own SharePoint. Build a couple out and then increase the progress of that. Talk with your other users, talk with your other teams. HR is a good place to start too because HR has a lot of content that is consumed throughout your environment, throughout the organization. Got to have content from HR. They may be very hungry for ways to make their jobs easier and for ways to surface data to people in better ways. Use that new functionality as soon as possible. If you're SharePoint Online, don't be afraid of it. Jump in and use it. The sooner you're comfortable with it and can kind of spread the good news about what's happened, the sooner the rest of the environment will be more comfortable with it. Don't be afraid to be social. Talk with your folks. What do they need? What would they like SharePoint to do for them? What new great things are out there that we can use to get them what they need out of SharePoint? And if you're not following some of the SharePoint and Office 365 blogs, the product team social sites, and even, dare I say, Twitter, I highly encourage you to do that. When I was a farm admin, my favorite thing to do when new updates came out was go to Twitter and just watch people talk about the blood they were bleeding because they were the first ones to install those updates. And I would wait and just watch the feed and see when people stopped saying the negative stuff about it and the kinks got worked out and things were moving smoothly. That's when we would sit down and start applying those updates to our servers. Office 365 blogs and the SharePoint blogs will give you a heads up of what's coming when so you can anticipate it and be ready for it. Stephanie, do you have a favorite blog that you follow other than the PAIT blogs for this kind of content?
Sure. I like to hit blogs.office.com. That's really a business user, power user friendly site, and it's where all the new announcements are. So, anybody on SharePoint Online at least using Office 2013, 2016, that's going to be a really good resource for you to go find out the latest and greatest of what's going on. Outside of that, I probably hit a number of different blogs, but I'm with you. I'm very much a social creature, so I kind of go through Twitter, and I find that Twitter is a great resource for finding posts that really cover all areas of SharePoint, all versions of SharePoint. There's still plenty of posts out there for older versions of SharePoint, especially 2013. A lot of people still using it. But using the hashtag SharePoint, if you're on SharePoint Online, the hashtag O365, things like that. So you find a lot of really good content by hitting Twitter. So that tends to be, I'm pretty scattered because I follow those hashtags and I'll take a look at the stuff that they're posting.
And you find such good ideas out there too, because people will tweet, they'll tweet their blogs, so if you can't find the right blog that you like, if you just follow those hashtags, like Stephanie said, they'll tweet their blog And before you know it, I mean, you've just got this wealth of information that's just coming right to you. And I believe you can even use Flow to send you emails when certain hashtags are tweeted, if I'm remembering correctly.
I know there's a template for the office blogs when new things are posted. It can actually post into Teams or into Slack. So pretty cool stuff out there in the Flow templates.
Yep, and that would be a good way if you're new to Office 365 to kind of get your feet wet with Flow, see how that works for you. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening there and more functionalities coming all the time. So with our performance expert having not landed yet, we are going to be wrapping up a little early today because I was giving him some good time to kind of do a deep dive into performance. I know Stephanie's monitoring the questions. Do we have any questions out there?
We don't have any. If you guys want a moment to post any questions, I do want to let you guys know there are some SharePoint Saturday events coming. It's conference season. There's a lot of conferences out there. For those that don't know, SharePoint Saturdays are a free event. You do have to go on a Saturday. Some of them, occasionally they're on Fridays, but they're great events, and you'll find them all over the country. So no matter where you are, you can probably look one up. spsevents.org is where you can find one close to you. I'm headed down to Nashville this coming Saturday for SharePoint Saturday Nashville. And I believe we've got a keynote from Jeff Teeper coming, which is really cool. If I remember correctly, he was there last year and kind of kicked off this whole new look for Microsoft. Something that I've really been shocked with is Microsoft's interest in the community. They are out and talking to people. Mark Cashman, he was just down at SP TechCon in Austin. So you're seeing the Microsoft folks out and about. They want your feedback. So if you're attending these events, you might get a close encounter with some pretty cool folks since they're out and they're mingling and they're answering a ton of questions for us. So definitely go check out your local events. That was spsevents.org. Come visit. You may see Sean or Mark or myself out as well. We go do those conferences and we speak. There's SP Fest in DC coming, SP Fest in Denver. SP TechCon is coming to DC, I think, later in the fall. So a lot of really good conferences out there to get more info. And the great thing about SharePoint Saturdays is that there's no cost to those like there are the bigger events. So great way to get information in a variety of topics as well. So not all SharePoint Online, not all new stuff. You'll find like Mark Rackley's session on jQuery will span about any version of SharePoint. So lots of good info out there.
And there's even an app for that. There is an SPS Events app available for iPhone, I know for a fact. I think it's available for Android as well. And I'll put a plug in for SharePoint Saturday. I'm glad you brought that up. My very first SharePoint Saturday I went to, I got teased a lot for it. I was the SharePoint Army of One in a pretty good sized company for a while. And yeah, you're going to go do SharePoint on a Saturday. You're going to work on a Saturday. You're not going to get paid for it. How dumb can you be? I had an awesome time. That's actually where I met Mark Rackley for the first time. And I won a free laptop in the raffle. So
that worked out well.
It worked out well. So you never know. They'll do software trial gimmies, and they'll do raffles and things like that. It's a great place to network, and then when it's all done, you go out for a share pint. So it's great. It's win-win.
You know, one other thing I thought of while we were talking about conferences too is the websites that are now available for feedback. So if you can't make it out to one of those events, but you'd still like to give feedback or learn about what other people are asking for, the user voice sites are getting more popular these days, and Microsoft is monitoring those. So there's one for every technology. For example, SharePoint.uservoice.com. You can go out there and vote up some of the new functionality that you want to see. You can submit new items. If there's something that you can't find on the list already, you can add your own. but it's a great way to give feedback if you're not wanting to go out to the conferences. So it's something else to go check out too.
Very cool. All right. Well, I believe that's all we've got. Stay tuned. We will be having some blogs on our PAIT blog site for the topics that were covered here coming out. Some will be by me, some will be by Sean. We've always got new content coming out, so keep an eye on that. And unless there are any other questions, we'll give you guys about 14 minutes back for your afternoon. Thank you so much for being part of today's webinar.
Thanks everyone for attending, and if you have suggestions on things that you'd like to see in future webinars, we'd love to hear from you. Joy, where do you want them to email if they have suggestions?
They can send that to, we can either go to the blog when those are out and comment there, or you can email me at jturner@paitgroup.com, PAIT group.com. And let me know what you think. We appreciate you guys.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.